Question: what do you get if you make lardy cake, but instead of using lard, you use duck fat? Answer: malardy cake. So today I'm going to be making something a bit like lardy cake, but instead of using lard, I'm going to use duck fat. This is leftover duck fat from my Christmas dinner. We'll talk more about what lardy cake is and what I expect this thing to be like as we go, but to start with, we need to make a bread dough. So I've got 500 grams of strong white flour, that's bread flour. To that we're going to add a teaspoonful of ground mixed spice, half a teaspoonful of salt, a teaspoonful of sugar. Then I've got 300 ml of lukewarm water here, some of which I've used to bloom my yeast. The yeast I'm using needs to be bloomed in water with a little bit of sugar. If you're using an instant fast action bread yeast, you may not need to do that blooming, but 300 ml of liquid in total. So I'll just mix those dry ingredients together. And we also need in here 25 grams of fat. That would normally be lard, but we're using duck fat today. So 25 grams. And then in with my wet ingredients. So my bloomed yeast and my warm water. For simplicity, I'm just going to use the dough hooks on my electric mixer. You could just do that kneading by hand, but I find it easier to use the dough hooks on the mixer. So yeah, if you don't have this equipment, you could do that by hand. Okay, and that's just mixed. You know, if you're kneading by hand, you might need to do that for 10 minutes. If you're doing it with an electric beater or food mixer, you probably find it'll be a bit quicker. But what we're looking for is a stretchy dough, like this. So that now needs to go in a warm place, covered up, for probably at least half an hour, maybe an hour, until it doubles in size. While the bread's proving, we'll just talk about the other ingredients. So I've got 125 grams of dried fruit here. I've got a mixture of sultanas and raisins. I've got 125 grams of sugar here, a mixture of demerera and unrefined soft brown. I've got 125 grams of fat, and this would normally be lard, but this is duck fat, and an unwaxed orange, and I'm just going to use the zest of this. This is not necessarily traditionally part of a lardy cake recipe, but I just think the duck and orange connection is probably a good one to pursue. I think some versions of lardy cake do have candied peel in them. So I'm just waiting now for that dough to double in size. Let's go over to Studio Shrimp to talk about what is lardy cake and why am I making it with duck fat. Lardy cake is a kind of tea cake originating from the southern counties of England, although I think it's known throughout the land. It's made from a bread dough, often spiced, rolled and layered with dried fruit, sugar and lots of lard, then folded and baked. So whereas things like croissants and Danish pastries have a dough laminated with butter, lardy cake, as the name suggests, is a similar idea but with lard as the fat instead. There are different regional versions, sometimes rolled into a big swirl and baked in a round tin like an enormous Chelsea bun, or folded a couple of times and baked in a square one. It's usually turned upside down after baking so that the melted sugar and lard can soak back down into the bread. Lard, that is rendered pork fat, is perhaps an underappreciated ingredient these days, and it's tempting to think of it purely as a fat for making savoury things like crusts for meat pies. But you don't have to look very far back in time to see it being used for all sorts of sweet baked items too. It still is today, just not as much as once it was. But I'm using duck fat for this experimental malardy cake. Duck fat has similar culinary properties to lard, slightly lower melting point, and a richer and more distinct flavour, so that part could be interesting. The duck fat I'm using is leftover from our Christmas lunch. We opened that tin of confit duck legs that I brought back from that trip to France earlier this year. Those tins have 4 to 6 pieces of duck in them, and the rest is just solid duck fat. You get a lot of duck fat, and it's great for making roast potatoes and things. I've got so much of it left over that I thought I'd give this a try. And as much as I'd love to take credit for the name malardy cake, that honour goes to Mr. Panda on the Atomic Shrimp Discord server. I mentioned I was going to make this, and I didn't have any idea what I was going to call it. Malardy cake was Mr. Panda's suggestion, and I absolutely love it. One other thing to mention is that during my travels in Spain, I encountered something called torta de chicharrones, which is very similar to lardy cake and is topped with a mixture of sugar and smashed up crispy pork rinds. That is known as pork scratchings to me. These are the crispy bits left over after baking or frying the rinds to render the lard. I did the same with the duck leftovers, so I will be topping my malardy cake with crumbs of crispy duck skin. Right, that dough should be ready by now, so let's go back to kitchen shrimp. My dough has now doubled in size, so we'll need to roll that out, but first I'm just going to take a little bit of this fat and grease this tin. So this duck fat's been out at room temperature for half an hour now, and you can see it's softened. Lard will not tend to do that quite so readily. Duck fat is got a slightly lower melting temperature than pork lard. I don't think that's going to make a lot of difference to this bake. I think most of the difference here is going to be the flavour. But yeah, so about 25 grams of this fat is going to be used for greasing this tin. And actually just an extra little bit of sugar in here. And just shake that all over the tin. Stick it in place with that fat. That was less than 25 grams of sugar, but just a coating of sugar on the tin there. So we'll set that aside, and then on a floured surface, out comes the bread dough. And you can see we've got a lovely, pillowy, stretchy, soft bread dough here. So yeah, this is 60% hydration, and you can just see how lovely and elastic and relaxed and soft that dough is. That's good. So just fold that a few times. And then I need to roll that out to basically 3 times the size of this tin. So a bit more flour because we can't have it sticking. And this might not want to roll out straight away because it's, you know, this is a bread dough. The gluten is starting to develop. So we'll just take it easy. Give it a moment to relax if necessary. And sometimes I like to actually just roll it out like that and just hold it like that. If we just hold it, that will help it to relax into that position. So that's the dough rolled out to pretty much 3 times the area for that tin. Now, this duck fat is going to be, well, if it was lard, we'd have to dot it on there. They'd call it dotting just because it's harder. So you'd break the lard up into little pieces and spread them out evenly. But because this is duck fat and it's a little bit softer, we can almost butter this onto here. Trying to spread it more or less evenly, it will spread itself around as the thing bakes. So I mentioned, I think, that this is in some ways analogous to a croissant where you've got a lamination of butter. This is not folded as many times as a croissant, so it won't be like puff pastry. It's going to be more like bread. Now the fruit, as evenly as I can get it across the top, and the sugar. Okay, then I'm going to fold it over like that. If I thought about that, I probably would have left some of that uncovered, but never mind. Okay, and then seal it at the edges. There's a little bit of fat oozing out there, so not to worry. Fold it over again, and then I'm just going to roll it out back to the size of this tin, which is actually hardly any rolling at all. So we're just going to get it like that into the tin, press it down so it fills the whole space, and then this needs to prove again for at least half an hour, and again till it's doubled in size. But just before that happens, some of the lardy cake recipes don't do this. Some of them do this after it's been proved but before it's baked. I think I'm going to lose air out of it if I do it that way. So I'm going to go just with this hard spatula down through like that. 3 lines to make 4 pieces, and then 2 lines to make 3 pieces. So we're dividing it into 12 portions. It will, to a certain extent, rejoin as it proves, because this bread dough will expand. But That pattern should hopefully still be visible on the top. Back to the warm cupboard to prove until that's doubled in size. Right, that's now doubled in size, and you can see it's kind of swimming in fat. This is going to fry as much as it bakes in that fat, and that is intentional. That is by design. Oven is preheating to 180 degrees Celsius fan, which is equivalent to these other measurements. We'll check that after half an hour. While that's baking, this orange, I'm going to scrape the zest off it with this zester tool. And I want this cut really small, so I suppose I could have just used the fine side of a grater. I am actually going to use the juice as well. I didn't think I was going to, but I've got an idea. So the zest is just the orange bit on the outside of the rind. It's where all the orange oil is, and it's got a lovely aroma. We don't want the white pith, which is just bitter. I'm going to chop that very small. That should do it. So lardy cake would normally be glazed with golden syrup. I'm going to make a zesty orange glaze instead. So I don't think we're going to need all of this orange juice. We'll start with a quarter and see how we go. So into here I'm going to add icing sugar. That might be called powdered sugar in your part of the world. Yep, we need more. Now, I could have worked those lumps out. There are some little lumps of sugar in there. But, as with a lemon drizzle cake, the little lumps of sugar can be regarded as a feature, not a bug. That's about right, I reckon. That's about drizzle consistency. So that was about 3 tablespoons full of sugar to 1/4 of an orange worth of juice. And yeah, not going to worry about those lumps. They are just little sugary treats that are going to crystallise on top of the mallardy cake. And this is all that's left of the crispy rendered duck skin from when we rendered the fat out. There was a lot more than that when I baked it, but it mysteriously vanished. This will be enough for a little garnish on top of our mallardy cake though, and I'll cut it smaller so it can be sprinkled on together with a bit of crunchy sugar. I'm going to mix that with about the same amount of demerera sugar so we've got a crunchy topping. Okay, that's the 30-minute mark. Let's just have a look at it. So it's sprung really well. I think that needs about another 10 minutes. So I'm just going to turn it, put it back in, 10 more minutes, and then we'll take it out. Okay, I reckon we're there. It's kind of hard to tell, but we've got a good spring. I think it is a bit doughy in the middle, but lardy cake is supposed to be a bit doughy. This isn't obviously lardy cake. This side, which is going to be the bottom in a minute, I'm going to brush with just orange juice. This is just the remaining pressed orange juice, and I can hear that sizzling because it's hitting the hot duck fat. We've got to turn this out in a minute, but we're not going to attempt that just yet. We're going to give it a few minutes cooling, because at the moment this is full of scalding hot fat and it would not be good to just spill that everywhere. But what I will do is just make sure I can run. It's pretty good actually. I can run a knife along the edges there quite freely. I think that's going to turn out okay. Make sure it's free. I'm going to leave that to stand for probably 5 to 10 minutes before I attempt to turn that out. Alright, so this has had a chance to cool for a few minutes. I'm just again going to run that palette knife around the edges to see if we can just get it free. It's still quite hot, so I do need to be careful here, but there we go. It's not going to come out in one piece. Complete disaster. It's coming out in lots of pieces. Anyway, let's see if we can rescue this. Oh, not terrible. It did just stick. Right, I'm going to get these pieces out of the tin here. And carefully, if we just stick them back on there, we can pretend. There we go, we can just pretend that never happened. Oh yeah, look, you can't see the joint. So there we go, turned out perfect first time. So now, it's ever so sticky on the bottom. I think it actually only needs a tiny bit of this orangey glaze, but this is for flavour as well as stickiness. I'm putting it on while it's still warm because that'll drive off some of the moisture out of this. That'll make it sticky rather than soggy. Now my duck fat and sugar sprinkle, or duck scratchings I suppose we should probably call this, and then that will stick in place as this sugary caramel mixture on top starts to cool down. And you can see in the tin it's actually already formed like hard toffee in there, so I probably should have turned that out a bit quicker. But the problem with doing that is that it's hazardous. Anyway, all's well that ends well, and we'll see how this ends in a moment. I'm going to let that cool down a bit before I try to taste it because it will still be scalding hot inside. Alright, it's probably still a little bit too hot to actually serve, but I can resist no longer. Let's have a taste of Lardy cake. Nice corner piece there. So inside, springy and a little bit doughy, but cooked. And on the outside, not quite hard caramel, but almost like toffee on the outside. I think you deserve to see my first reaction to this as it plays out. Well, here we go, Lardy cake. It is just like lardy cake. I thought I would be able to tell the difference. Maybe when it's cold. However, I haven't tried the bit with the crispy duck topping on there yet. That is really good. But yeah, it's really just like lardy cake. I'm not disappointed, but I'm surprised that it's not that different. It is extraordinarily good though. So yeah, there we go, Lardy cake. It's good for all the same reasons that lardy cake is good. That crispy topping, I just wish I hadn't eaten so many of those crispy duck bits because I think more of that would be better. It's good. It is, I think, a little bit sweeter and more cakey than lardy cake. It's perhaps a little bit just sweeter overall and a little bit lighter than lardy cake. So maybe that's the difference the duck fat makes. Either way, it's very, very good. I'm not disappointed. So if I was going to make this again, I think I'd make it in a pan with a loose bottom. Maybe a spring form or something like that. So we don't have to have that calamity when we tip it out. Other than that, I think I would just make this exactly as it was again. Recipe notes will be in the description if you want to try making this yourself. That was my experimental Lardy cake. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.